What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. Last week on the channel, I was joined by best-selling author Chase Hughes, and we looked at the parade of nonverbal communication of every living U.S. president and vice president as they were all in attendance at Jimmy Carter's funeral at Washington National Cathedral. First of all, I'd like to take a second to thank you all for the amazingly positive feedback. It's one of the best performing videos in the history of the channel in terms of the feedback. That said, there were some really interesting conversations and questions in the comments. And one of the things that you guys brought up the most is why not get a lip reader or talk to a lip reader about what Barack Obama and Donald Trump were discussing while seated next to one another. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. This is going to be a follow-up to that video where we're going to look at some of the most common questions that you guys had, and we're going to answer them. We're going to talk about some more moments that you guys were talking about in the comments. And at the end, we're going to do a whole segment on lip reading, because not only are there lip readers who commented online, but I spoke to an amazing lip reader who told me some really great stuff about this conversation, but also lip reading in general. Oh, and for those of you who are interested, stick around to the end of the video because I have some really big announcements and news. So without further ado, let's dive into the most popular questions. Okay, so let's start with someone who was definitely a big part of our analysis and a big part of the conversations in the comments, and that is Marilyn Quayle. And that is the wife of Dan Quayle, who was the 44th Vice President of the United States. Now, we didn't get a very good look at him because he was right on the edge. He was sitting to her right, so we couldn't see him very well, but her, we got a lot of really great looks at. So one of the things that we noticed and talked about at great length is how when she was talking to people who had just walked in, she had a great big smile on her face as she was interacting, and then the moment they turned around, that smile just snapped off her face. And in a lot of cases, there was no trace of it left whatsoever. Now, generally speaking, when we see an emotional display go on and off like that, like a switch, it's a social gesture. Genuine emotional displays have what we call a refractory period. This means that after the emotion hits genuinely, it kind of fades slowly. A really good example of this is Al Gore, who was sitting directly to her left. He also smiled when people came in and he greeted them, but as they turned around and took their seats and he sat down, we still saw small signs of that smile lingering there, that pleasant feeling, because the emotion doesn't do this. Gestures can do this, but emotions tend to do that. And we have that refractory period, which is us coming off of that emotion. So one of the questions that we had about Marilyn Quayle is it possible that she caught herself with this big smile and realized, oh my God, it's a funeral, this isn't appropriate, and shut it down for that reason? And the answer is, although it's possible, it's unlikely for a couple of reasons. One, this didn't happen just once, right? If this happens once where you're at a funeral or somewhere where you shouldn't be smiling, and you smile and you catch yourself, it's unlikely that you would do it again a minute later. But a further reason I don't believe this to be the case is because usually when you see that kind of thing, you notice that moment that the person realized, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't be smiling that way. The hand might come up, they might turn away, they might turn a little, they might look around, did anybody see me? There was none of that. There wasn't a social awareness that caused these smiles to go away. It was just, I'm done with the interaction, the smile is gone. Another thing to keep in mind is that when people are in a setting where they shouldn't be smiling and they're aware of that and they're trying to restrict the smile, they don't restrict the duration, they restrict the intensity. So very often at funerals or sad events, if someone's just trying to convey, I'm not overly happy, you'll see these tight-lipped smiles of like this, even mouth shrugs of, this is sad, but it's nice to see you, or I don't know what to say, but it's nice to see you. So very tight and muted in intensity, not in duration. In her case, when she was smiling, she was really smiling. So it's unlikely that her cutting that smile off was an attempt to not look too happy at a funeral, because typically that affects the intensity of the smile itself. So when you put all this together and notice that smile that goes on and off, depending on whether she's interacting or not, points to this being a very practiced social smile. Speaking of Marilyn Quayle, a point that Chase made was that she's an expert at masking, which means putting on a certain emotion if it's not necessarily how you feel at the moment. And because of a lifelong experience as an attorney, as a socialite, she hosts a lot of fundraisers, this is something that's very practiced for her, and she's very effective at it. She's good at it because in those interactions, she seems like she has this big smile, but the moment they turn around, it's gone. And a question that a lot of people had was, well, isn't the fact that we could see it go away, like the fact that we see it instantly go away 3 times, doesn't that indicate that she's not that great at masking because we saw it? Well, not necessarily. Masking means in the interaction with the person. Not every social situation has footage where behavioral analysts and the entirety of the internet can look at it and try to figure out what's going on. Yes, we saw it, but the people that she was interacting with did not. As far as they're concerned, they were having an interaction with a smiling, happy individual. So socially, she's quite effective at that because the person she was socializing with didn't notice it. It's really, really hard to fake that refractory dimming of an emotion. It's very hard to do that consciously. This is why for us it goes on and off when we're consciously saying, okay, smile now, okay, stop smiling now. If you want to observe social masking in the real world, one of the best professions that you can observe are waiters and waitresses, especially in high tip areas or areas that have a lot of just high energy communication, right? So I'm thinking about places like Las Vegas, for example. If you go to a restaurant or a bar in that kind of environment and you look at the waiters, you'll often see them approach the table with this beautiful high energy. Welcome guys, I'll be your waiter tonight. Are we having a good time? And every so often when they turn around from that table to go back to the bar or go back to the kitchen, you could pretty much instantly see that smile wipe away. This was almost a performance for the table. It's their habit, it's their routine. They go to the table, they switch it on, they leave the table, they switch it off, and you can see it. And those of you who have worked in restaurants or bars will know exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that they're not good at masking. These are the heavyweight champions of masking because the table that they're interacting with gets a pleasant, fun interaction. And just because we see that when that's over, that smile is gone, it doesn't mean that they didn't mask it properly for that table. Okay, now we're gonna talk about Melania Trump, George Bush, the Obama and Trump conversation, and the biggest assumption that some people made about something Kamala Harris did. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on, and please take a quick second to like this video because it really helps the channel. Okay, let's talk about Melania Trump, Donald Trump's wife and the current First Lady. It's so bizarre because between the first video and now, the administration has changed, so there are different people who have different roles. So at the time that I'm filming this video, she is recently the First Lady again. And some people asked some questions about what we thought of her nonverbal communication and her demeanor. So I think most of you watching the video would be able to determine that most of the time she had a pretty stoic demeanor. You know, she walked in, she went to her seat, she turned around, she said hi to a couple of people that her husband was talking to. Then she sat down, and there were moments of conversations where Donald Trump turned to her and, they were talking about something in the program or just discussing it. She gave a bit of a response, but most of the time she just sat there in her chair. Now, some viewers commented that this was the 1-year anniversary of her own mother's death. Here's the thing. In my seminars, I often say that you can't really analyze a lack of reaction. If you see someone and they're not giving you anything, that in and of itself is not something to analyze. You could say, somebody else or most people would react this way to this, but a lack of reaction is not a reaction. And most of the time, she was sitting there, she was pretty stoic. Every now and then she would interact with her husband, he would show her something, she would acknowledge it. But yeah, she didn't have a big range of emotions. And I don't know if that's because she's thinking of her mother. It's very possible. If she's at a funeral a year ago, her mom died, it's very possible that she's thinking of her mom. I don't know if it's because she's thinking of something else. I don't know if it's because she doesn't really feel like socializing. I can't tell you the reason for something. That's not analysis, that's just guessing. You'll notice she was sitting at the edge of the aisle next to her husband, who spent quite a few minutes talking to Barack Obama. And we'll talk about that conversation in a bit, but this was a position for her where she can't really socialize with anyone, and she was just sitting there with a rather neutral demeanor most of the time. So we talked about her nonverbal communication as she entered, which had some interesting things, but because there was so much going on, we didn't spend too much time talking about her rather neutral baseline. Because when we observe someone's baseline, we don't spend hours trying to figure out why is it this way. For example, if she burst into tears or we saw signs on the face suddenly out of nowhere of sadness before the service, we could say, oh, well, I wonder what's going on there. Maybe this has something to do with her mother, and we can look into that. But as long as she's more or less sticking to that neutral baseline, there isn't much to analyze. Speaking of wives, this was hilarious to me. There were a few comments, really not that much, but they were funny, so I had to bring it up, that said, why didn't you guys talk about Michelle Obama? Because she's not there. What do you want us to analyze? We're behavioral analysts, not attendance analysts. So we don't, I don't know why she's not there. I don't know, is it a good reason, is it a bad reason? You guys can look that up, you can decide that for yourself. We can't analyze someone who isn't there, so I guess that's why. Another person that we talked quite a bit about, but you had some elaborations in the comments that I thought were really, really interesting, is George W. Bush. So there was two moments that came up a lot. One is that on the way in, as he went to his seat, he ignored Donald Trump. A lot of people said he ignored Donald Trump purposely. But if you really look at that, he pretty much ignored everyone. From one angle, it looks like he's ignoring everyone. From the other angle, we see this little belly tap to Obama. Now Bush and Obama are pretty close. In fact, they're distant relatives, 10th cousins or something like that, which doesn't really matter because I don't know any of my 10th cousins, but there's a closeness there. And Obama got up because he had to let Bush go to his seat. So he got a bit of a quick interaction, a quick little belly tap, but then Bush went right past him. He didn't greet anyone else either. He just sat down. If it wasn't for the people who greeted him, and he turned around and he was receptive to that as a response, he's not the one who initiated those greetings. Notice how President Obama had a chair in front of him, so he had to get up to let the Bushes through. President Trump did not have a chair in front of him, so he didn't have to get up. He could stay seated. Remember to consider baseline. It's really important. If he walked in there and he was chummy with everyone, initiating conversation with everyone, except for Donald Trump, then you could say, yeah, okay, there's something going on there. But he didn't initiate an interaction with anyone except for the person who stood up to let him get through. Speaking of George Bush and people ignoring people, there was something a lot of you talked about that we had in the original analysis, but because it dragged out too long conversationally, I had to cut it out. But I agree 100% with everyone who brought this up. When the Clintons walked in, the way that they ignored George Bush was significantly more noteworthy than George Bush ignoring anybody else when he came in. The reason for that is a break from baseline. When the Clintons came in, a bunch of people stood up. That whole back row stood up, and George Bush stood up as well. And they greeted the people in that back row, but they did not greet him. There was no handshake, there was no hello, there wasn't much of anything, and he kind of awkwardly looked around and just kind of sat down. He didn't seem super bothered by it. He didn't look at them in disgust or rage or anger or anything like that. He just kind of looked a little confused, like, oh, okay, I guess we're not doing it, and he just kind of sat down. Now, mind you, there's something we have to keep in mind both for Bush and the Clintons and Bush and Trump as well, and it's something we did talk about. It's the fact that it's likely that this is not the first time anyone's meeting that day. Donald Trump in an interview said that before the service, they all met in a room. They were all in a room before the service from where they came out. I don't know exactly who was there, but it's unlikely that this is the first time that day that George Bush ran into the Clintons. But as we said last week, and this is really important, it is the first time it's happening on camera, and they know this. So even if all these meetings that we're seeing are not the first one of that day, they're aware that it's the first time that millions of people are going to see them walk into the room. So the way they greet each other communicates something to that audience. So in this case, do I know why the Clintons ignored Bush? No. Knowing the why is really, really difficult. Knowing the intention is very difficult. So is it because they feel a certain way towards him? Is it because they were distracted saying hi to people in the back so they didn't really register? You know, if they saw it now, it'd be like, oh my God, we can't believe we did that. I don't really know what it was, but it was a little awkward because they said hi to everyone behind them. He awkwardly sat down, and when they sat down, there was no interaction there. He didn't like turn to them and say, hey, well, how are you? Nothing like that. He just stood up and sat back down. Okay, next, there was a big moment with Kamala Harris that a lot of people talked about in the comments, and I have a lot to say about this. So it was when she walked in, she was going down the aisle to her seat, and she stopped and she let her husband through to sit to her left. And a lot of people said, how can you guys ignore that? That was a really important moment. You guys missed this, that she stopped and she let her husband through as a buffer between her and Trump because she didn't want to sit near Trump, so she had him go through as a buffer. A lot of people went as far as saying that, if you'll notice, she's the only wife sitting on the right of her husband. So obviously, she was just letting him through as a buffer, obviously. So I have a lot to say about this. First and foremost, I don't think anybody needs a behavioral analyst to point that out. She literally stopped and let him through. There were no subtleties. But the second thing, there's a faulty piece of logic there. Yes, if you focus on husbands and wives, she is the only wife sitting to the right of her husband. That is correct. But there's something very unique about Kamala in that room. She's the only president or vice president who's a woman. So if you don't look at them as husbands and wives, if you look at them as presidents or vice presidents with their spouses, then everything is normal. Now, because every president and vice president is sitting to the right of their spouse in 100% of cases, and it makes sense that Kamala Harris would be next to the Bidens, it's likely or possible that there was an arranged seating chart. They were told to sit at a certain place in a certain order. So without knowing that, I can't know if that was her decision or a decision that was already made. If it was already made, there's nothing there to analyze. She didn't make that decision. Could it be that? Of course, it could absolutely be that. But people who get really excited and jump to conclusions and only look for evidence to support that and look at her as a wife as opposed to a vice president because that way it works out. Oh my God, look, she's the only one sitting on the other side. That's very presumptuous. And if you think critically about where some of these people are sitting, you start to realize maybe it's not their decision. A really big example that comes to mind is I think George Bush would much prefer to sit next to Barack Obama than Hillary Clinton. Because we know the relationship he has with Barack Obama, and we could see that, between Hillary and George Bush, there really is nothing going on. So if he had a choice, I'm pretty sure he'd rather sit right next to Barack, but he went through, he sat down, and his wife sat between him and Barack Obama. So I think there might have been a seating arrangement. By the way, do I think that Kamala Harris is quite content that there's one more person between her and Donald Trump to put her that much further from him? Quite possibly. But do I think for sure that that was her decision in that moment? No, not for sure. Possibly. Speaking of assumptions, this is something I just want to put out there for those of you who watch a lot of content online and care about the way you communicate with the creators that you watch, especially in the fields of analysis or reaction videos. One of the most irritating things that we could see in our comments, and I've talked to a lot of creators about this, is when we cover something and we see, oh, you missed this, or you didn't talk about this, or how come you didn't cover that? And then the person goes on to name something that's important for them to talk about, or something that they saw, or something that they noticed. There is nothing wrong with saying, hey, here's something I noticed, and asking a question. We love that kind of engagement. And when we see those kinds of comments, it's a joy to answer that kind of thing. Look, the stream that I did with Chase last week, as an example, was over 3 hours long. I can't put a 3-hour long video on YouTube. I have to condense. I have to decide what's more punchy, what's more to the point. So things that a viewer might notice or that a viewer might think are specifically important to that viewer may not work with the synergy of the video. If I talked about every single possible thing from last week's video, that video would probably be over 8 hours long. There was a lot to talk about. So yeah, sometimes things aren't going to make the final cut. And this was a really good example of a moment that we left out with good reason. Not because we missed something, but because the people who are jumping to conclusions on what that moment was may have missed something. I mean, a behavioral analyst missing that moment would be like a doctor missing a big gushing wound on someone's forehead. Again, I have no issues with comments who say, hey, I noticed Kamala did this thing, I think it might be that, what do you guys think? And open that dialogue. I love that. I'm just letting you know this in case you think about the way you communicate with your favorite content creators. You might want to take this into consideration. Okay, next, still on the subject of Kamala Harris. So there was a big moment where she sat down, and when Obama started to talk, she turned around and then turned back, and we saw this uncomfortable cringe on her face. And we talked about how this is a common situation that we see very often, and it's in that moment, she's hoping maybe someone's going to engage her, break the awkwardness. She's wondering if she'll be accepted into this club of presidents. So she's sitting there, and then she hears something from Obama, someone that she obviously respects, and she turns around thinking maybe he's going to say something to her because she just got here, notices he's not, then she turns back around, we see that cringe, and she all of a sudden takes interest in that booklet or that program that she was holding. And some people in the comments, this wasn't that popular, but it was a good question, said, could it be possible that he's talking, in church, and she's like throwing darts at him, like, shush, don't talk in church? I think that's unlikely for a couple of reasons. First, we don't see any irritation on her face before she turns around. It's not like a, oh my God, or any kind of, oh my God, this true. And this kind of, throwing daggers, turn around, like, hey, keep it down. There was none of that. Further, and this is really important, it's not like he was talking for a while before she turned around. She didn't have time to get irritated. It's the second he opened his mouth. So it's not like she heard him say, he could have been asking for a Kleenex. It could have been just this quick one-word thing. So it's very rare to see someone get instantly irritated when someone starts to talk. It just doesn't add up. And finally, I just don't believe that Kamala Harris is going to discipline Barack Obama in public like that after he said like a word or a fraction of a word. It just doesn't add up. And if that was her goal, she didn't do it. Once again, it's like she turned around and said, hey, keep it down. There was nothing like that. She turned around and just turned right back. So yeah, I think this was exactly what we said it was. And remember, most of my experience is on stage with audiences where I observe interactions with audiences and use that in my work. So this is something I've seen a lot, and it looks pretty much exactly like that. Next up is a question that came up not too often, but a few times, and I thought it was really interesting, so I wanted to address it. Chase said that when something holds our attention, we lean into it to give it interest. And if something is not that interesting or we disengage from it, you might see a shift in baseline where the person leans back or puts what we call ventral distancing between two things. So with Trump and Obama, they're both leaning into each other, and this shows that there's a certain amount of interest there. Maybe not their best friends and they're going to run off into the sunset together, but some amount of interest. So some people said, well, hold on, what if it's just because they're in church and they have to lean in to even hear each other because it's too loud in there? Yeah, but that's still interest. If I'm leaning into you because it's loud, I want to hear what you're saying, I'm interested in what you're saying. This could have been shut down in a second. They could have leaned in, whatever, yeah, acknowledgement, and then just lean back out and make it difficult for the other person to engage. It's not necessarily the fact that they leaned in to begin with, it's the fact that they remained leaned in, as opposed to just, okay, nice talking to you, and just kind of go back here. Trump could turn to talk to Melania. Obama could turn to his right and talk to the Bushes. So it's more the fact that they remained leaned in that indicates that there was some kind of held interest there. Which brings us to the big question. What were they talking about, Barack Obama and Donald Trump? Because it looked quite friendly. Headlines all over the world talked about how friendly it looked. Donald Trump himself commented on how friendly it looked. So what was this? In the comments, we had a lot of different theories, and often it was polar opposite theories. Like, for example, oh, Barack Obama hates Trump, he's just indulging him, or he's like making fun of him, or the exact opposite. Trump doesn't like Barack Obama and he's making fun of him or he's indulging him. So what I think is that all these really strong beliefs of things along those lines are filtered through bias. Because the person themselves doesn't like Obama or doesn't like Trump, they believe that the only way to communicate with that person is through mockery and it can't be anything else. But all these people are ignoring something. And for them to put on this big charade and make it seem that friendly, they would both have to be idiots because they know that we're all watching. So even if they're leaning in and going, oh my God, I hate your guts, they're still smiling, they're still leaning in. It still looks friendly. Almost every headline around the world is talking about how friendly it looks. They know, at least partially, that that's what they're communicating to the world when they're sitting there chatting it up. So even if one really dislikes the other one, that's not what's being communicated here. What's being communicated is two colleagues just having a chat. But the big question is content. The number one thing people said is, can we get a lip reader on here to figure out what it is they're talking about? And once again, for those who assume that we didn't talk to a lip reader, that is 100% incorrect. I did talk to a lip reader. Some of you might remember last year, I had a friend of mine, Sabrina, on the channel. This is a friend of mine who lost her hearing and now uses lip reading to communicate. And she's excellent at it. When I noticed George Bush and his wife having an interaction where the body language suggested that he saw someone he recognizes, and as he was saying hi to her, she asked something, and it seemed like she was saying, who are they to me? And he gave some kind of answer, and she acknowledged that. When I saw that, I texted Sabrina. Actually, I texted her husband and said, hey, can you ask Sabrina if what she's saying there is, who are they? And he's giving some kind of answer. And she said, yes, that's what she's saying. She's saying, who are they? And he's giving some kind of answer to that. So I checked in on her for that. But while we're on the subject, I asked her, hey, by the way, Obama and Trump, what's going on there? Can you give me something about that? And she gave me some very detailed answers as to why any lip reader would have a hard time with this. But since the video, because you guys asked, I went back to her and asked her a couple more questions and sent her all the scenes where they were talking and said, give me anything you've got. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, let's look at two other accounts who shared some lip reading insight on what they were discussing. First off, we have someone who's really big for lip reading on social media. Her name is Jackie G, or Jackie Gonzalez, and some of you might recognize her from Squid Games if you watch that, and she is deaf. It's not someone who chose to learn lip reading, it's that she uses lip reading in day-to-day life in order to understand people. So she made a video about the first little communication between Obama and Trump. Let's take a look.
It's about his school. It's short. His what? I didn't think he did anything. I never saw it. Me. Even the lowest kind of people. Even they're not happy. But you already know that, I'm sure. If it even happens. They'll have to board the entrance and the hallways.
Okay, super interesting. First and foremost, Jackie puts on all her videos a disclaimer that reads, lip reading is not a reliable form of communication. All statements are alleged. And it's really interesting that she notes that. So what she's giving is, okay, it might be this or something similar to this. And that makes sense because it kind of seems like this conversation didn't really follow. Almost like there was a couple of subjects intertwined in there. But it's interesting that there are some things that you're going to see in a moment have in common with what Sabrina told me. We'll get back to that in one sec. Next up, we have Inside Edition, who used the services of a lip reader by the name of Jeremy Freeman.
According to lip reader Jeremy Freeman, Obama says to Trump, "I can't talk. We have to find a quiet place. This is a matter of importance, and we need to do this outside so that we can deal with it, certainly today." At one point, Trump says, "I've pulled out of that. It's the conditions." Can you imagine that? It's unclear what Trump is referring to.
Okay, so with Jackie G, as she was saying what she was seeing, I could see it. I could go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's exactly what's going on there. With this one, none of it. I couldn't place any of it. So I'm wondering if that's just Inside Edition who put a random clip with what this lip reader said to them. Like he said this, at some point they're saying this, and they weren't sure what part he was talking about, so they just show us Obama and Trump talking and put, okay, here's some of what they said. Because if you look at the clip of when they're putting that, it doesn't seem like that's what's being said in that moment. Now, with that being said, Sabrina looked at all the clips that I sent her, and none of what she said came even remotely close to any of this. So I'm finding it a little hard to believe that one lip reader got this whole thing almost like clear conversation, whereas another lip reader didn't see any of that. Now, I don't like to challenge experts. I don't know why this may have happened. Maybe he's a little better at doing it from the side or something. I'm not really sure. All this to say, this didn't come through in what she saw. Finally, I used an AI tool for lip reading where I took these videos and I put them into this lip reading AI tool that has worked previously, but it didn't work. It for none of the clips. For one or two of them, it sent back some gibberish that didn't make sense, but for most of them, it got nothing. And I think the answer to that and why it got nothing has to do with the fact that there aren't that many lip readers covering this at all, and something Sabrina told me. So Sabrina couldn't appear on the channel, but I asked her some questions, she gave me some answers, and I'm about to convey to you the things that she said. So first and foremost, something that I found fascinating in what she said is that lip readers specifically focus on the lips. I asked, like, do you look at other things on the body? She said, if someone points to something while they're talking, we might look to see what they're pointing at. And if they're doing gestures with their head, we might see in our peripherals, but we're very focused on the lips. So for example, with George and Laura Bush, whereas I use nonverbal communication, where I saw him wave to someone, I saw her kind of stare at them with this pleasant nod, but this kind of confusion. Whereas I use that, she looked specifically at the lips and said, no, she's saying, who are they? That's how she knew, not with the rest of the context. I thought that was really interesting. Another thing that she said was that this specific clip is very difficult to analyze for a couple of reasons that I thought were fascinating. One is that in a lot of the cases, we're seeing the side of Obama's face. And it's much harder apparently to do the lip reading when you're not seeing it from the front, the full mouth. She also said that it doesn't help to over enunciate when you talk to them. That doesn't help them at all. A normal, slow pace is what's perfect for them. And she said normally Obama is very easy to understand because he speaks at a normal pace. He enunciates well without exaggerating, and he doesn't talk too fast. So she said usually he's a pleasure. But in this case, it was very difficult. She couldn't get much. On the other hand, she said that Donald Trump is difficult because of the physiology, the way he talks, the way he moves his mouth, and specific details of his face. He's very difficult to lip read. And even as someone who doesn't know anything about lip reading, I could see that because there are times where you see the vocal cords moving, but the mouth isn't doing much. So I could see why she would say that. In addition to this, she said that the margin of error with lip reading is huge. She said that with people that you're familiar with, that you know how they communicate, how they move, it could be much higher, 80%, 90%. People who speak clearly, that you're used to watching them, like Barack Obama, could be up there as well. But she said with general public, there's a margin of error of about 50%. Very often, you're not sure what they're saying, and things like distance or lighting or clarity or even on their face, a mustache or something like that can affect that margin of error enormously. As a result, I begged her. I said, give me anything you have, a word here, a sentence there, whatever, give me something. And she gave me little bits and pieces there. Nothing huge. She said, look, I don't have much. Here's what I do have. And let's look at those. So the first clip that she got a couple of tidbits on was actually the clip that Jackie G was looking at. And it's funny how it's similar, but it's not exactly the same, and that difference could change everything. So at the exact moment where Jackie G says that Trump said his what? I didn't think he did anything. I never saw it. At that exact moment, Sabrina thinks he said, oh really? So when Jackie G felt he said his what? Sabrina said, oh really? And then at the end, Sabrina said that he's saying, I haven't heard. Whereas Jackie thought he was saying, I never saw it. And those are very different things. But it's kind of like one of those pictures where if you think of one thing, you see something. If you think of another thing, you see something else. Or those things where you hear different things depending on what you're focusing on. Because if I look at the oh really, I could see oh really or his what. Both kind of make sense. So check it out. I could say his what or oh really. And they both kind of make sense. I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards Sabrina, oh really, but I'm not a lip reader, so I don't know. But it's funny how they both saw something completely different and they both do this every single day of their lives. Then they both agree on the I didn't think something, and we see it in the gestures as well. As he's looking at him, his head is going no like this. So that's consistent with a negation. I didn't think something or other. So he's negating something that Obama said. And for the last one, again, it depends on what I have in my head as I'm looking at it. Because if we go with Jackie Gonzalez, he would be saying, I never saw it. And if we go with what Sabrina thinks, I haven't heard. And I could see where the confusion is here because, again, I'm not a lip reader, but I know that often as Donald Trump is speaking, he puckers the lips a little bit. So I could definitely see how I haven't heard comes in, or I never saw it, it comes in like this as he speaks. I could see how they would look very similar. But in either case, it's a negation. So what the conversation is, it seems like Obama is saying something and Donald Trump is talking about how he didn't have too much information on that. It seems like maybe something about a school, and we even see the mouth go ooh like this, so maybe about a school. Maybe he's talking about the pamphlet they were given. Maybe there's some kind of, I don't know, biography in there about Jimmy Carter. So he's saying something here about his school. It's short. I don't know, but then at the end, they'll have to board the hallways. Doesn't really seem too connected with a lot of what's going on. So I think it's really interesting, especially where it matches up and there's that denial of something, but I don't think we can 100% confidently, run with, okay, that's exactly what was said. I think that margin of error is important. In that same segment, when Jackie Gonzalez says that Obama said, even they're not happy, at happy, Sabrina felt that the word was actually either habit or happen. And again, if I look at it and listen to those three words, happy, habit, or happen, I could see how that could be any one of them. So happy, habit, happen. But again, that distinction is really, really important because Jackie G is talking about him saying that people aren't happy. The lowest people, even the lowest kind of people, aren't happy. But if he's saying habit or happen, that doesn't work in that sentence. So it could mean something totally different. So yeah, again, that margin of error. In that clip that no lip reader has looked at online, Sabrina says that to whatever Donald Trump is saying, Obama responds, no, of course. And that makes a lot of sense with the gestures because if you look at his head shake, there's a bit of a no gesture and then a nod. It's like, no, of course. And his hand kind of goes up like this in this kind of quick hand shrug, which we often see with like, no. So, this gesture like, no, I totally agreed. So some kind of like agreement where he's saying something, he's going, yeah, no, of course. And then as Trump continues to talk, Sabrina said that Obama responds, I was, twice. And the twice is exactly as his eyes look up like this and we see an eyebrow flash. Now the scene is changing, but we catch the end of that eyebrow flash, which is something we use for emphasis. And you can even see in his mouth as he's saying twice, there's like this punchy twice. So, and he's looking up twice. So if that is what he's saying, it seems like he's putting this emphasis on this, I was, twice. Whatever this is, I did it 2 times. So my mind is going to them talking about the terms as presidency. And whatever he's saying is like, yeah, no, of course, I agree with that. And then he's reminding him like, I was twice, like I did this twice. And finally, in this last exchange, Sabrina gave me fragments. So not full sentences, but she gave me fragments. And I was able to place some of them, but maybe you guys can look at it and try to place more of them. So she said in the beginning, he says one of them. And I saw when that is. This looks like he's saying one of them. Then moving on from that, he said a name that has the sound QU in it. Then yes, as he had nods. She was. Then you don't have to. Sometimes problems. Then it doesn't, as he nods his head and says, yup, right. So these are just fragments that we have. So they're talking about maybe someone, and then you don't have to, sometimes, maybe some problems, and then yup, and right. What's interesting is that that conversation is the same one that Inside Edition played as their lip reading expert was talking about the stuff he was saying. And there's almost nothing in common between what Sabrina said and what he said. So again, I don't know if Inside Edition had the wrong clip and they were just showing us while saying, okay, here's some of the things they were saying. I don't really know. But if it is, there's a lot of disagreement. So I think what we could learn from all this is that there really isn't much certainty. There isn't even that much agreement. But if we look holistically at what we're seeing, there seems to be some advice flying around with some reactions to that advice. I don't think there are any obvious displays, whether it's with the nonverbal communication or any of the lip readers saying that they're like digging at each other or insulting each other. Some people said they're just saying they're insulting each other. There might be a couple of digs here and there, I don't know. But it doesn't seem like that's most of what's being discussed. I also don't think that it's this big, massive state secret that's being discussed. I know, once again, we like exciting narratives, right? We'd prefer this to be an episode of Blacklist where the lip reader from across the room sees that they're discussing this top secret thing and then it's cracked and the case is solved. That's probably not what it is. I mean, once again, they were in the same room before they came out here. They know there are cameras. They know there's gonna be people looking at it trying to figure it out. It would be really idiotic of them to sit there and talk about big state secrets. The Inside Edition lip reader seems to think that there was a really important conversation about something really important that's urgent, like a really important matter, whereas none of the other two seem to think that there was something urgent that Obama was telling Trump to have to talk about. And again, my question, look, I'm not gonna question an expert who does this for a living, but my question to that would simply be, okay, if there is this big important matter, why would he talk about it here at this funeral when they're surrounded by people on camera? When he saw him before, he could see him after. So again, I would take that with a grain of salt. And I go back to the fact that, some people asked in an exciting or curious way, could we get a lip reader on this? But a lot of other people were, again, almost on the offense. Like, you guys should have a lip reader here. Why don't you have a lip reader? Almost like we have to have a lip reader. And this is a big part of the reason that I didn't include lip reading in the original analysis, because it takes a lot of time to go through what they're all saying. And at the end of the day, there's so much disagreement that it pretty much had to be its own segment and it would have completely diluted the original analysis. So again, when I look at these videos, I'm thinking not just as an analyst, but also as a content creator. It has to be concise. But this was still a good follow-up to have to answer some of those questions that came up a lot and look at some of these things. Okay, now for some exciting announcements. So a lot of you have been asking all over social media how the baby is and how it is being a father. And I love it. As I knew I would, as I suspected I would, I love it. I love seeing the development of emotion and seeing those giggles. The first time he giggled, I lost it. Because the first time I caused the giggle, I lost it. It was amazing. And I've decided not to share any pictures for privacy. Hope you understand. But everything's great. He is adorable and I'm loving every minute of it. We're figuring out the schedule. It's working and all is great. Thank you for asking. Second, for those of you who are on the West Coast of the USA, there's some really cool opportunities coming up where you could see me live. One of them, if you're in California or in the area, I have a show on February 8th. This is going to be at the Norris Theater, also known as the Palos Verdes Theater. That is in Rolling Hills Estates in California. It's about a half hour from LA, so it's really accessible to all those areas, anyone who's in that area. And it's a lovely theater. I've been there before. It's a beautiful theater. Had a great time there. Last time I was there, it was sold out. Tickets are selling well this time, but if you're in the area, I'll leave a link in the description. Come check that out. February 8th at 8 p.m. And note, this is my award-winning mentalism show. It's entertainment. And although there's some body language and nonverbal communication sprinkled in there, and you'll see how cool it is, the way it applies in entertainment, this is my mentalism show. So I bring people up and I tell them things about themselves and I know what they're thinking. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I would say for age, it's appropriate for teens and up. So bring the spouse, bring your teenage kids. It's going to be awesome, and I hope to see you there. Once again, I'll leave information in the description. Speaking of performances, I've been getting a lot of questions about the Vegas residency that I announced a couple of months ago, and that's coming up as well. I know a lot of you are excited to come to Vegas and check it out. So the contract technically starts on March 5th. But I would give that a buffer because you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes with rehearsals or, someone with a flight or something, takes a delay. So I would give it a bit of a buffer, and I would get anything after March 12th to be really safe. And I'm going all the way till May 19th. So anytime in that span that you get a ticket, I will be on stage as the host and mentalist in the show Limitless at the Venetian. This is Shin Lim's show. He won America's Got Talent. He won America's Got Talent Champions. He's fooled Penn and Teller twice. He's a world champion of card magic. He is mind-blowing. And in those dates, I will be the host of the show. And throughout, I will be doing really awesome mentalism bits that I'm sure you guys are going to love. So anytime you go to his show in that span, I will be on stage. And it's in a beautiful theater at the Venetian. I will leave information and links for tickets to that in the description as well. So I really hope to see some of you guys, whether it's in California, whether it's in Vegas. All the information is in the description. Of course, please come say hi. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy seeing some of the stuff we talk about on the channel applied to my entertainment, where I use it to tell people things. They're like, oh my God, how do you know that about me? And it just comes together with the trickery, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy it. And I hope to see you there. Let me know what you thought of this video, and I will see you on the next one.